In David Cavanagh's The Creation Record Story, my magpie eyes are hungry for the prize. As Alan McGee in 1993 was trying to break America and get a big sum for signing Oasis to Creation, he found himself in Los Angeles. Members of Ride were also in LA, keen to meet George Drakoulias and convince him to work on their album. Since the signing of the Sony deal, Ride's autonomy had been chipped away, and they had gone from being one of the most important bands on Creation to one of the least. They had been working on material in an Oxfordshire studio and were banking on Drakoulias to marshal them into shape and get them singing more aggressively. The indie band of yore was listening to Americana these days. The Black Crowes, Little Feat, Graham Parsons, and the Steve Miller Band. George Drakoulias had rehearsed Ride for a week in Oxford with a view to producing the album in the autumn of 1993. Seeking ways to streamline their sometimes open-ended music, he got them to play tightly structured versions of the Creation's How Does It Feel to Feel and the old standard Windmills of Your Mind. It was almost like a songwriting workshop, says Andy Bell. He was great at taking a song that was 5 minutes long and making it 3.5, without losing any of its punch. You've got to go to the middle 8 here. You haven't got a middle 8? Well, write a middle 8. However, when the band was ready to make the record, Drakoulias was unavailable to do it. Ride had lost the one man who could have taken them in an American rock direction. I think he saw us as just too English, says Steve Queralt. There was no way we were going to sound like the Black Crowes. The antithesis to Drakoulias' ball-busting biker personality, the reserved Englishman, John Leckie, had just given up on the Stone Roses' second album, Second Coming, and had a window free before he was due to begin a Radiohead project, which was the Bends. Leckie and Ride moved into Sawmills studio in Cornwall during the snowy winter of 1993. Access to the studio, which stood on an outlet on a river, was via a boat. Egress seemed only a matter of time. I nearly left the band, recalls Queralt. It was a case of being homesick and being stuck in the middle of nowhere with no escape. If you're not getting on with people in the band, Sawmills is just hell. I felt like a session bassist, and Andy was starting to dictate too much how things should go. I remember him standing by Loz for ages, telling him what beats to play. You didn't get any praise for what you did anymore. You do a bass line and no one would say anything. With Ride's rhythm section seeming increasingly functional, and as apathy set in right across the personnel, Christmas saw a change of location to the Manor in Oxfordshire, Richard Branson's Virgin Records studio. The sound of the album changed too, to pseudo-majestic, hallucinogenic anthems tinged with tamboras and the Louisiana swamps of Dr. John. What had been planned as an immediate-sounding American-produced live rock album was turning into the most embellished and at $150,000 most expensive record Ride had ever made. In January 1994, the mixing was being conducted at Abbey Road Studios. The atmosphere at Abbey Road was tense. Andy Bell and Mark Gardner addressed each other economically and without humour, like a married couple that has agreed to stay together for the sake of the children. The kids, Steve Queralt and Loz Colbert, wondered if a quick divorce might be a better idea. It was January 1994. Ride were mixing their album, which it had become painfully clear was overlong and rather too self-important. Alan McGee told the NME he had heard 5 hit singles on it. That was 5 more than anyone else heard. Andy Saunders from Creation Records remarks, I had huge misgivings when Alan came bursting in and went, Birdman is the first single. We come back with a difficult record that makes people think we were going, what's your thinking behind this, Alan? He's going, it's an epic. It'll confuse people. Sire in New York was taking a close interest in the album. John Leckie sat in on a meeting to decide the track listing and argued the case for a collection of 10 punchy songs. Unfortunately, 10 punchy songs were not something Ride had. Leckie told them to do more work on the creations How Does It Feel to Feel and put it on the album, or Sire would not be releasing it. The last of the self-governing indie bands of the early 90s gave in to the A&R man's ultimatum without a protest. During the mixing stage, Noel Gallagher had been a frequent visitor to Abbey Road. The Gallaghers were Ride fans. Liam Gallagher had once had a burst of OX4 from Going Blank Again, greeting callers on his answering machine, and Ride were just as interested to hear the latest news from the Mancunians camp. Noel was welcome, says Loz Colbert. There was a brilliant sense of joviality and cheerfulness from him, and an excellent approach to the whole surroundings and trappings of music. He was a complete gem whilst he was sat there in Abbey Road, and a brilliant antidote to everything that was going on around us. Andy Bell had always had a tendency to get dizzily excited about the new thing in guitar music. The House of Love, My Bloody Valentine, the Stone Roses. But Oasis held him in a near religious spell. It was hard for him to feel inspired by his own album when tapes of Live Forever were being passed around. Noel was like a shoulder for me to cry on, he says. I talked to him about things I didn't feel right talking about with the band guys. He basically said, take pride in what you're doing. What you do is really valuable to the band. You've got a right to say something if you don't feel happy with things. That rubbed off. Around that time, I went to the band with a bit more confidence and said that I just wanted to put the full writing credits on the album. Not just the words, but the whole song. Sole authorship was something Noel Gallagher planned to claim on Oasis's records in no uncertain terms. The issue remained, however, a bone of contention in Ride. There was always an indistinctness about the roles me and Mark played, says Andy Bell. The attraction of Oasis in some ways was that it was very much like, he does this, he does that, they do that, and it works. Noel's got a very straightforward way of looking at things. Gallagher had brought to Abbey Road a tape of Oasis' debut album, which they had been recording in Wales at the time, before moving on to Sawmills, where they finished it. Creation Records had released around 140 albums in 10 years, since its inception in 1983. In the same period, for context, if you look at Food Records, they had only put out just 9. James Kylo points out, Alan may have said that he was going to cut down the roster, but he was still signing 2 new groups for each one that he got rid of. However, Creation would sign no new acts between February 1994 and April 1995. The president, Alan McGee, had more pressing matters to contend with. On the 20th of February 1994, he got on a plane to Los Angeles and got taken off at the other end by paramedics, and 2 days later he was being given oxygen in a hospital. He was out of the game and on his back. When Steve Queralt heard Park Life, he knew it was all over for Ride. Next to Damon Albarn's bubbly self-confidence, they had the look of a woolly mammoth in an amusement arcade. The average age of Ride was 25, but it might as well have been 40. The mood of the nation was happy, says Queralt, and it seemed like all our songs were just too slow and too dreary. Ride was still popular with the music papers up to a point though, and Melody Maker had planned to feature the band on its cover. After overseeing an interview and photo session in Los Angeles, Andy Saunders of Creation Records got a call from the paper's features editor a few days later, before the story was due to run. He goes, I've got some terrible news. Kurt Cobain's died. Saunders recalls, I'm like, have I still got my cover? He goes, no, you don't understand. I've got some terrible news. Being bumped from the Melody Maker cover for Kurt Cobain, says Saunders, was a real portent. It had all been set up really nicely. Suddenly we couldn't give it away. Relations between Ride and Creation soon hit an all-time low when an NME journalist quoted an unnamed person at the label as saying that the group would probably split up in the near future. The source was later revealed as Dick Green, and it seemed that Dick Green might be right when Birdman, the first single to be released from the new album, charted at a startlingly low 38. It was like, "Oh, is that it?" says Dave Newton, Ride's manager. "Last time we released a new single off an album, we got to number 9. Is this the last time we're in the top 40? The answer was yes. As Ride were losing friends at the label, Oasis were gaining them. The widespread feeling towards the Mancunians from Creation acts was congratulatory rather than resentful, and there was much speculation about how far they could go. On 5th of May, members of Oasis, Ride and the Boo Radleys faced a room full of NME readers at a conference to promote June's Undrugged concert at the Albert Hall. "I couldn't believe it," says Steve Queralt. "Liam and Noel were just so charismatic and friendly." Martin Carr, who was representing the Boo Radleys with Sice, remembers, "We had no chance. Every question nearly was towards Liam and Noel. I think Ride got 2 questions and we got 1, and our question was about Oasis." So, from being media darlings in the early 90s and being the golden boys of Creation Records, Ride could see a fellow Creation Records band, Oasis, surpassing them right in front of their very eyes, and Oasis proved to be the perfect antidote to the horrors of grunge, whereas Ride were really struggling with the relationship between Andy Bell and Mark Gardner just crumbling away, and their final gig in England happened early 1995, supporting Oasis, which really symbolises the shift in where they stood in Creation's roster, not only Creation's roster, but also in the view of the general public. Ride would release Tarantula in 1996, and by that time Ride had broken up, and that was it for Ride in the 90s. A dismal end to such a bright, promising start. Nowhere and Going Blank Again remain classic albums to many people, and their resurgence in the 2010s and in the 2020s have really allowed Ride to regain that popular status and win new fans from a new generation, including myself, who became a massive fan in 2015 after seeing them play at the Roundhouse, a packed out Roundhouse in London. And from then on, I've seen them 7 times, and I plan to see them a couple more times at the end of 2024, after Interplay gets released on the 29th of March 2024. Ride on.